A construction company began transporting a giant turbine across a newly opened mountain road. An old farmer walked his old mule past. The mule suddenly stopped, refusing to take another step. The old man looked at the road and said, "Do not bring the machines across here today." An engineer laughed out loud. "You let a mule decide for the engineers?" No one listened to him. The morning fog clung to the pines of Washington State. Up here at Crane Break Pass, the air usually smelled of crushed pine needles and cold rain. Today, it tasted like diesel exhaust and burnt rubber. Vanguard Heavy Logistics had arrived. They brought noise, steel, and a deadline. Behind their lead trucks sat the prize, a generator turbine weighing 200 tons, painted a blinding industrial white, belonging to Orion Energy. It looked like a spaceship stranded in a forgotten forest. Sterling stood by the edge of the fresh asphalt. He was 35 years old. His white button-down shirt held crisp creases. His suede boots were completely out of place in the damp dirt of Blackwood Valley. He held a glowing tablet. The screen displayed topographical scans, painting the terrain in bright greens and safe blues. According to the satellite data, the ground was solid. According to the multi-million-dollar software, the road was ready. A clump of wet clay kicked up from a passing worker's boot and landed on Sterling's trousers. The smile vanished from his face. He pulled a pristine white handkerchief from his pocket, wiped the mud away with a grimace, and tossed the cloth into the weeds. He tapped the screen of his tablet. He shouted at the foreman. The schedule was behind by 3 hours. Delay meant thousands of dollars lost per minute. He ordered the transport convoy to fire up their engines. The mountain trembled under the weight of 18 wheelers starting simultaneously. Thick black smoke choked the misty air. Harlan watched from the tree line. He was 68. His hands looked like carved oak, stained with decades of grease and soil. Beside him stood Buster, an ash-gray mule with a faded scar across his left front leg. They had been collecting fallen firewood. The noise did not bother Harlan. He had seen logging camps louder than this. What bothered him was the ground. Buster stepped onto the edge of the newly laid asphalt. The mule froze. His ears pinned back flat against his skull. He raised his right front hoof and struck the black pavement. It was a hollow sound, a sick, empty echo that did not belong on a solid mountain pass. Buster snorted, backing away. He refused to step forward. Harlan did not pull the lead rope. He trusted the animal. The old man knelt by the road. He placed his bare, calloused palm flat against the cold tar. He closed his eyes. The vibration of the idling trucks was there, but beneath it lay a different rhythm, a faint, rapid shivering, the silent rush of subterranean water tearing through loose gravel. The heavy rains from 3 days ago had not drained down the valley. They were trapped right beneath the new road. The earth was hollow. Harlan stood up. He walked slowly toward the convoy. He stopped near the man in the crisp white shirt. "Do not bring the machines across here today," Harlan said. His voice was low, barely carrying over the rumble of the diesel engines, but it held a weight that made the nearby workers turn their heads. "It is hollow underneath." Sterling stopped tapping his tablet. He looked up, scanning Harlan from his worn leather boots to his faded flannel jacket. Sterling looked at the gray mule standing nervously by the trees. A smirk broke across the engineer's face. He let out a loud, sharp laugh. "You let a mule decide for the engineers?" Sterling asked, his voice dripping with amusement. He pointed to his tablet. "I have satellite penetration radar right here, old man. It says the bedrock is stable. I have a degree that says this road can hold 300 tons. Go home, watch some television, leave the heavy lifting to the professionals." Harlan did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He looked at Sterling's polished boots, then at the heavy turbine, and finally at the road. He simply nodded, turned around, and patted Buster's neck. They walked away, taking the long way around the ridge. Some men build their towers of arrogance so high that they cannot see the mud waiting at the bottom. We live in a world that worships glowing screens and paper degrees, often forgetting the quiet wisdom forged in dirt, sweat, and time. If you find peace in the old ways, if you believe that true respect is earned through calloused hands rather than loud voices, take a moment to subscribe and join our community. You are not alone in valuing the quiet truth. Now let us watch what happens when arrogance meets the unforgiving reality of nature. The diesel engines roared. The massive transport rig inched forward. Its heavy drive wheels bit into the fresh asphalt. Sterling stood safely on a solid rock ledge, watching his triumph unfold. He checked his gold watch. They would make up for lost time. 10 minutes passed. The lead tractor crossed the halfway mark of the pass. Then the sound came. It was not a loud explosion. It was a soft, tearing noise, like a thick canvas sail ripping right down the middle. Sterling frowned. He looked at his tablet. The screen flashed a sudden, violent red. The sensors screamed, but the warning came too late. The black road surface bent inward, the asphalt spider-webbed in all directions. A geyser of muddy brown water shot up through the cracks. The subterranean water pocket had completely collapsed under the extreme weight. The front wheels of the lead rig vanished into the earth. The massive truck slammed down onto its steel frame. Metal shrieked against rock. The long trailer carrying the 200-ton turbine jerked violently. The rear axles slid sideways, dragging the load toward the steep, unforgiving drop of the ravine. The driver slammed the brakes, but there was nothing to grip. Mud swallowed the tires. The entire rig tilted at a terrifying 15-degree angle. One more foot, and $50 million of machinery would tumble down the mountain. Silence fell over the pass, broken only by the hiss of severed air brakes and the heavy gurgling of muddy water. Sterling dropped his tablet. The glass screen shattered against a stone. The green and blue topographic maps flickered and died. He did not pick it up. The color drained entirely from his face. His crisp white shirt suddenly clung to his skin, soaked in a cold, heavy sweat. He pulled out his phone. His fingers shook as he dialed the corporate office of Vanguard Heavy Logistics. He whispered into the receiver. He listened. The voice on the other end did not care about satellite scans or geological software. The voice only cared about the bottom line. Sterling lowered the phone. His jaw tightened. The director's voice was still ringing in his ear. "Do whatever it takes, Sterling. Sign whatever you have to. If that turbine goes over the edge, the insurance won't cover gross negligence, and the company is bankrupt. I am giving you emergency discretionary authority for any field expense. Save that cargo or don't bother coming back." Corporate wasn't asking for a report anymore. They had handed him a blank check and a heavy burden of responsibility. He yelled for the recovery crew. Vanguard had brought 2 heavy wreckers for emergencies. The massive tow trucks moved forward, their amber lights flashing. But as soon as their front tires touched the saturated ground near the sinkhole, they began to sink. The earth had turned into a wet sponge. Modern, heavy-wheeled equipment was entirely useless here. They needed something with tracks, something light enough to float over the mud but strong enough to move a mountain. An older local worker leaned on his shovel. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Only one thing around here can pull that rig out without sinking," the worker said quietly. "And it belongs to the old man you just chased away." Sterling looked at the worker. He looked at the tilted turbine groaning against gravity. He looked down at his suede boots. The nearest heavy lift helicopter was 2 states away. He had absolutely no choice. The walk to the farm was a mile of pure humiliation. The paved road ended. The dirt path began. The autumn rain started to fall in a slow, freezing drizzle. The mud clung to Sterling's boots, making them heavy and awkward. He slipped twice. His expensive trousers were soaked with brown sludge. The sharp creases were gone. His arrogance washed away with every step he took toward the rusted mailbox at the end of the valley. He reached the farm. It was perfectly quiet. Everything had a place. The axes hung neatly on the barn wall. The smell of sweet hay and old motor oil filled the air. It was a stark contrast to the chaotic, sinking disaster he had just left behind. Harlan sat on the covered porch. He was whittling a piece of cedar with an old pocket-knife. The wood shavings fell to the floor in perfect, slow spirals. Buster, the gray mule, stood under the barn roof, chewing a mouthful of alfalfa. The animal watched the engineer limp into the yard. Sterling stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He was breathing hard. He looked up at the old man. "We need help," Sterling said. His voice cracked. The corporate authority was gone. Harlan did not stop whittling. He did not look up. He just let the knife glide smoothly through the wood. "We need help," Sterling repeated. The cold rain dripped from his chin. His hands hung loosely at his sides. The expensive tablet was gone. The crisp authority was gone. He was just a cold, frightened man standing in the mud. Harlan blew the cedar shavings from the blade of his knife. He folded the tool with a sharp metallic click. He slipped it into the pocket of his denim overalls. He did not smile. He did not mock the young engineer. A stoic man finds no joy in kicking a dog when it is already drowning. Harlan stood up. His heavy boots made slow, deliberate sounds against the wooden floorboards of the porch. He walked to the railing. He looked out past the barn, past the gray mule, toward the jagged peaks of Crane Break Pass hidden in the fog. "The mountain is hungry today," Harlan said softly. "My wheeled wreckers are sinking," Sterling blurted out, the words rushing from his mouth in a desperate stream. "The ground is like a sponge. The turbine trailer is sitting at a 30-degree angle. The earth is giving way. If that rig shifts another foot, $50 million of equipment will roll into the ravine. My foreman said you have a track machine, a crawler. I need it, now." Harlan looked at him. His eyes were the color of old iron, calm, unreadable. He turned his back on the engineer and walked slowly into the cabin. The screen door shut with a quiet thud. Sterling stood in the freezing rain. He wanted to scream. He wanted to demand action. But he knew he had no power here. He was completely at the mercy of the man he had insulted 2 hours ago. Minutes passed. The silence of the farm was agonizing. Finally, the door opened. Harlan stepped back onto the porch. He carried an old, heavy wooden box secured with tarnished brass latches. He set it down on the weathered oak table near his rocking chair. The box smelled of dry dust, cedar wood, and old secrets. Harlan unfastened the latches. He reached inside. He did not pull out a set of keys. He did not pull out a tool. He pulled out a rolled-up piece of thick, yellowed parchment. The edges were frayed and cracked. He unrolled the stiff paper onto the table. He used a heavy steel wrench and a ceramic coffee mug to hold the corners down against the mountain breeze. He looked at Sterling. He gestured with a calloused finger. Sterling walked slowly up the wooden steps. His boots left thick trails of mud on the clean boards. He leaned over the table. It was a topographical map. It was completely hand-drawn in faded black ink. The date at the bottom corner read October 1952. "My grandfather drew this," Harlan said, his voice steady. "He ran the logging crews through this valley before the state ever thought about paving a road. He knew every rock. He knew every hidden spring." Harlan pointed a thick, scarred finger at a specific curve drawn on the paper. It was the exact location where Vanguard's transport convoy was currently sinking. Right beneath the line of the road, drawn in faded blue pencil, was a large shaded circle. Next to it, written in neat cursive, were the words, "Deep water vein, rotted bedrock." Sterling stared at the 70-year-old piece of paper. His breathing stopped. "Your computer screens look down from the sky," Harlan said, his tone devoid of anger. "They scan the tops of the pine trees. They measure the flat dirt. But they do not see the roots. They do not see the veins bleeding under the skin of the mountain. Buster felt the echo in his hooves. The map proved it. You chose to trust a machine that has never touched the mud. The realization hit Sterling like a physical blow. The multi-million-dollar software, the drones, the geological surveys, all of it had been defeated by a dead logger's pencil and a tired gray mule. The humiliation was absolute. But Harlan was not finished. He reached into the wooden box a second time. He pulled out a crisp manila folder. From it, he extracted a single sheet of paper. It was a standardized legal document. The heading at the top was printed in bold black letters, Independent Heavy Salvage and Recovery Claim. It was a clause born from maritime law, often applied in the rugged logging country for emergency extractions of high-value cargo. Harlan took a short, yellow pencil from his chest pocket. "I am not an employee of Vanguard Heavy Logistics," Harlan stated clearly. "I am a private citizen. You are requesting an emergency extraction of commercial freight from an active hazard zone. Standard salvage rates apply." Harlan leaned over the paper. In the blank space for the recovery fee, he wrote a number. He pressed hard on the pencil. He turned the paper around and slid it across the table toward Sterling. Sterling looked down. His eyes widened. The blood drained entirely from his face. Fee, $500,000. $500,000? Sterling choked out, his voice a high-pitched whisper. The shock brought a brief flash of his old arrogance back to his eyes. "That is absolute extortion. You want $500,000 to pull a truck out of a ditch?" Harlan did not blink. He stood perfectly still. "I am not charging you to pull a truck out of a ditch," Harlan said smoothly. "I am charging you for the machine that will not sink. I am charging you for the man who knows exactly where the solid rock is buried. And—" Harlan paused, looking straight into the engineer's panicked eyes. "I am charging you to save your career." Sterling opened his mouth, but no words came out. $50 million turbine, Harlan continued calmly. $10 million rig. If they roll down the ravine, the insurance company will tear Vanguard apart, and Vanguard will destroy you. You will never work in engineering again. $500,000 is a very cheap price for your future. The rain beat against the tin roof of the porch. The sound was deafening in the silence between the two men. Sterling looked at the yellowed map. He looked at the stark numbers on the contract. He had no leverage. He had no time. The earth was swallowing his pride, and this old man held the only rope. Sterling reached out with a trembling hand. He picked up the yellow pencil. His fingers slipped on the slick wood. He pressed the lead to the paper and signed his name on the dotted line. Harlan took the paper back. He folded it neatly. He placed it in his pocket. He did not gloat. He simply nodded. "Wait here," Harlan said. He stepped off the porch and walked out into the rain, heading straight for the closed doors of the old wooden barn. The heavy wooden doors of the barn groaned as Harlan pushed them open. The air inside smelled of diesel fuel, grease, and sleeping steel. In the center of the shadows sat a machine that belonged to a different era. Harlan pulled the heavy canvas tarp away. Beneath it rested a Caterpillar D8 crawler tractor, built in 1968. The yellow paint was faded and chipped, but the exposed steel beneath was coated in a thin layer of protective oil. There was no rust. The heavy steel tracks looked like the treads of a tank. It lacked computer screens, automated leveling systems, or air-conditioned cabs. It was purely mechanical. A monstrous assembly of gears, heavy iron, and raw combustion. Sterling stood in the barn doorway, shivering in his wet clothes, staring at the vintage machine. He had called it scrap metal in his mind just hours ago. Now, it looked like a rusted god of salvation. Harlan climbed onto the steel seat. He did not turn a key. This machine required physical effort. He primed the fuel pump. He engaged the decompression lever. He grabbed the starter cord for the small pony motor. He pulled it with a violent, practiced jerk. The small engine coughed, sputtered, and roared to life with a sharp, rattling scream. Harlan waited. He listened to the pitch of the small motor. When it reached the right frequency, he slammed the heavy clutch lever forward. The small motor engaged the massive flywheel of the main diesel engine. The sound was apocalyptic. The heavy diesel block fired. A thick plume of black smoke shot out from the vertical exhaust pipe, hitting the barn roof. The sheer vibration shook the dust from the rafters. The engine idled with a deep rhythmic thumping that vibrated through the mud and into Sterling's boots. It sounded like the heartbeat of an iron giant. Harlan engaged the tracks. The Caterpillar rolled forward. The heavy steel grousers bit into the muddy farmyard. The machine did not slip. It did not sink. It floated over the soft earth with brute, mechanical confidence. As Harlan steered the machine toward the mountain trail, he whistled loudly, a sharp, piercing sound. From the edge of the paddock, Buster the gray mule trotted forward. The animal ignored the loud roar of the diesel engine. He walked right up to the front of the moving tractor. Harlan slowed the Caterpillar to a crawl. "Go on, old boy," Harlan yelled over the engine noise. "Find the rock." Buster began to walk up the trail, leading the way toward Cranebrake Pass. Harlan followed exactly in the mule's footsteps. Sterling had to jog through the freezing mud just to keep up, gasping for air, trailing behind the old man and his animal. When they reached the disaster site, the situation was worse than Sterling had feared. The rear trailer tires had sunk another 6 inches. The turbine was groaning against its heavy chains. The Vanguard crew stood back in the rain, helpless, watching their multi-million-dollar cargo edge closer to the abyss. When the roar of the vintage Caterpillar echoed through the trees, the crew turned. They watched in stunned silence as the old yellow beast crawled out of the fog. Harlan did not stop to talk. He did not ask for a situational report. He watched Buster. The mule walked to the edge of the sinkhole, sniffed the ground, and deliberately moved to the left, stepping high over the ruined asphalt. Buster walked toward the steep, rocky embankment flanking the road. He paused, stamped his hoof twice against the dirt, and stood still. The sound was a sharp, solid crack. Solid bedrock, hidden just inches beneath the soil. Harlan steered the Caterpillar exactly toward that spot. The steel tracks gripped the buried stone. The machine planted itself like a mountain peak. Harlan threw the gears into neutral. He engaged the massive mechanical winch mounted on the rear of the tractor. He grabbed the heavy steel hook attached to a braided steel cable as thick as a man's wrist. He dragged it through the knee-deep mud, ignoring the freezing water pouring over his boots. He climbed under the sinking rig, finding the heavy steel frame of the trailer. He secured the hook. He checked the tension. Harlan didn't plan a simple tug-of-war. He knew the physics of mud. He used a heavy snatch block to double the mechanical advantage of the winch, anchoring the Caterpillar's blade deep into the bedrock Buster had found. He signaled the transport driver to start his own engine. Harlan eased the lever back. The thick steel cable lifted out of the mud, humming like a giant guitar string. The Caterpillar didn't just pull. It acted as a solid mountain, an unyielding anchor that allowed the massive rig to leverage its own power without sliding into the abyss. Thick black smoke poured into the sky as the two machines fought the earth together. Slowly, agonizingly, the groaning trailer began to pivot. With the winch holding the weight and the transport's own drive wheels finally finding a moment of traction, the rig began to inch backward, dragged from the hungry mouth of the sinkhole. Harlan disengaged the winch. He pulled the throttle back. The massive engine settled into a low, rumbling idle. The Vanguard crew erupted into cheers. They clapped each other on the back. The $50 million turbine was safe. The disaster had been averted. Sterling walked forward. He was covered in mud from his chest to his boots. He looked entirely exhausted. He approached the side of the Caterpillar. Harlan climbed down from the steel seat. He wiped his greasy hands on a red shop towel. He walked over to Buster and gently stroked the mule's wet neck. Sterling stood there for a long moment. He looked at the vintage machine. He looked at the quiet old man. The arrogance that had defined him just hours ago was completely shattered, replaced by a profound, humbling awe. "How?" Sterling asked, his voice hoarse. He pointed a trembling hand at the mule. How did he know where the bedrock was? How did he know the road was hollow? Harlan folded the red towel. He tucked it into his pocket. He looked at the young engineer with calm, iron eyes. "He does not know anything about your engineering, son," Harlan said softly, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp mountain air. "He does not know about laser scans or tensile strength. But he knows where not to step. He listens to the earth. That is something your university forgot to teach you." Sterling lowered his head. He had no reply. He reached into his wet jacket, feeling the outline of the signed contract. $500,000. It was the price of his ignorance. And he knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that the old man had earned every single penny of it. Harlan did not wait for an apology. He turned his back on the frantic crew. He clicked his tongue. Buster flicked his ears and fell into step beside him. Harlan climbed back onto the Caterpillar, shifting the gears with a heavy clank. The old yellow machine turned around, crawling slowly back down the dirt path, disappearing into the cold mountain fog, leaving the corporate men standing silently in the mud. We often put our blind faith in the shiny, the new, and the highly educated, dismissing the worn, the quiet, and the experienced. But when the ground falls away beneath our feet, it is the old steel and the calloused hands that pull us out of the dark. If you felt a sense of justice watching the quiet man win today, if you believe that true wisdom is earned in the dirt, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, respect the old ways and watch where you step.